You're standing at a watering hole in Kenya, and an elephant just found her daughter's bones. Not fresh, not recent. Bones that have been sitting there, bleached by sun, for years. And she stops. She picks up a piece of skull with her trunk. She turns it over, gently, like she's checking if it's really what she thinks it is. Then she stands there. For minutes. Sometimes hours. Other elephants in her family do the same thing. They touch the bones. They go quiet. And then, eventually, they walk away. Now here's the question that should be keeping you up at night. Is that grief? Or are we just looking at an elephant's brain and projecting our own feelings onto something that doesn't actually feel anything at all? Because for most of scientific history, the answer from researchers was simple. No, animals don't grieve. That's a human thing. Attributing human emotions to animals was considered bad science, something called anthropomorphism, and it would get your research laughed out of a journal. Scientists spent decades actively avoiding the G word when it came to animals, even when what they were watching looked, for all the world, exactly like grief. But here's the thing about avoiding a word for long enough. Eventually the evidence piles up so high you can't ignore it anymore. Let's start with the elephants, because they're the most well-documented case, and honestly, the most unsettling. Elephants don't just react to a death in the moment. They return to the site. Years later, researchers have documented elephants traveling out of their way to revisit the bones of dead family members. And this is the part that gets weird. They specifically investigate elephant bones and ivory over the bones of other species. They don't stop for a buffalo skull lying in the same spot. They stop for their own kind. That's not a random reaction to a smell or a shape. That's recognition of something specific to their species, something close to what you'd call identity or loss. There's a term researchers now use, somewhat reluctantly, called animal thanatology, the study of how animals respond to death. And once scientists started actually looking, instead of assuming the answer, they found this behavior almost everywhere. Chimpanzees carry their dead infants for days, sometimes weeks, grooming them, protecting them from insects, refusing to let go, even as the body begins to decompose. Mother chimps have been observed doing this long after any rational read of the situation would suggest they understand the baby isn't coming back. Or maybe they understand completely, and that's exactly why they can't put it down. Orcas do something even harder to watch. In 2018, a orca named Tahlequah gave birth to a calf that died within half an hour. And instead of letting the body sink, she pushed it through the water, balanced on her head, on her back, carrying it for over 1,000 miles, for 17 days straight. Her pod stayed with her. They took turns helping carry the calf when she got tired. 17 days of a mother refusing to let go of her dead child in the middle of the ocean. If you saw a human do that, there would be no debate about what emotion was driving it. Giraffes have been recorded standing guard over dead calves for days, occasionally nudging the body as if trying to wake it. Dolphins push dead pod members to the surface again and again, as if trying to help them breathe. Crows, and this one genuinely surprised researchers, hold something that looks disturbingly like a funeral. When a crow dies, other crows gather around the body, and they go quiet. They don't eat, even though crows are famously food-obsessed opportunists. Instead, they seem to study the situation, almost cautiously, like they're trying to work out what happened and whether the same threat could get them too. So here's where it gets genuinely fascinating from a science perspective. What is actually happening in these animals' brains during this? Researchers studying elephants have found that their brains contain spindle neurons, a specific type of brain cell linked to social awareness, empathy, and emotional processing. Humans have them. Great apes have them. Whales have them. And elephants have them too. And in some regions of the brain, elephants actually have more of these cells relative to brain size than humans do. This isn't proof of grief exactly, but it's strong evidence that the biological hardware for complex emotional processing isn't unique to us. It evolved independently, multiple times, in multiple species, which tells you something important. Grief, or whatever we want to call this behavior, might not be a human invention at all. It might be something evolution kept reaching for, over and over, in any species smart enough and social enough to need it. And that social enough part is the key that unlocks the whole mystery. Grief-like behavior in animals isn't randomly distributed across the animal kingdom. It clusters, almost perfectly, around highly social species. Elephants, primates, whales, dolphins, corvids like crows and ravens. These are all animals that live in complex social groups, recognize individuals, form long-term bonds, and depend on those bonds for survival. A fish doesn't grieve, as far as we can tell. A solitary reptile doesn't either. But a creature that spends decades in the same family group, that relies on specific individuals for protection, food finding, and social support, that animal has something to lose when a bond breaks. And loss, biologically speaking, needs a mechanism. Grief might be exactly that mechanism, a kind of evolved alarm system that says something in my social structure just broke, and I need to process that before I can move forward. Here's an analogy that might make this click. Pain exists because it keeps you from putting your hand back on a hot stove. It's unpleasant on purpose because unpleasant things change behavior. Grief might work the same way, on a social level instead of a physical one. It's the emotional pain that comes from a bond breaking, and it might exist specifically to make animals more cautious, more protective, more bonded to the members of their group who are still alive. In other words, grief might not be a bug in the system. It might be the system working exactly as intended. Now, does this mean an elephant experiences loss exactly the way you do, with the same inner narrative, the same specific thoughts? Almost certainly not. We can't climb inside an elephant's head and confirm the subjective experience. That's the limit science keeps running into, and probably always will. But here's the more interesting question, and it's the one researchers are actually asking now. Does it need to be identical to be real? Because the behavioral evidence is stacking up in a very specific direction. Increased cortisol, the stress hormone, in chimps after losing a close companion. Elephants that stop eating normally for days after a death in the family. Orcas altering their entire migration pattern to accommodate a mother's mourning. These aren't philosophical claims. These are measurable, physiological, biological responses that mirror, almost point for point, what happens in a grieving human body. So maybe the old assumption was backwards. Maybe the surprising thing isn't that animals grieve. Maybe the surprising thing is that we ever assumed they didn't. Because when you actually look at what grief requires, memory of an individual, recognition that they're specifically gone, a bond strong enough that its absence changes your behavior, you start to realize those aren't uniquely human ingredients. They're just the ingredients of being a deeply social creature. An elephant standing over bones years later, orcas carrying their dead for over 2 weeks, chimps who won't let go, crows who go silent. They're not doing something human. They're doing something older than us. Something that was already written into the biology of connection long before we showed up to name it. So the next time you watch an elephant pause at a pile of old bones, don't ask whether that's really grief. Ask instead why we ever thought grief belonged only to us.